frying up patties and blabbity-blab. Huh? That's new. Strange place to park a car. What's this for?
SpongeBob, you're wasting me precious carbon dioxide.
Carbon dioxide?
I'm pumping it into the atmosphere, boy. Thanks to global warming, the temperature will soon go through the roof, and then we'll have an endless
We
summer.
interrupt this program to bring you an urgent public service announcement. Pollen levels are higher than ever this year, and people are encouraged to stay in homes. Now let's go to our reporter in the field, Jared.
Yeah, Thor, as you can see here, pollen is everywhere, even though you can't see it. Everyone who steps outside is at risk of being affected by this hazard. Pollen is a yellow, powdery substance that is released from the male part of a flower or tree. Pollen contains a male gamete that can fertilize a female flower. Pollen is transmittable by wind, insect, and other animals. Now let's ask some nearby citizens on what they think about the recent pollen outbreaks. Let's ask a few citizens around here about a few questions about the current pollen outbreak. Here's a citizen. Excuse me, sir. I'm Jared Quill from Channel 5 News. Can I ask you a few questions about the recent pollen outbreak?
Yes, it would be my pleasure.
What has your response been in the rise in pollen levels?
It has affected me to an extent, but my son Jack, it's affected him much more. He has a severe allergy to pollen. He was diagnosed with it around 7 years old, and we recently went to WakeMed Hospital to get a dose of a popular vaccine, Pollen X Quattro, to help him cope with his symptoms.
How has this vaccine affected your son?
He's had a reduction in symptoms. He used to be sneezing, coughing, and he had a runny nose a lot. Now his symptoms have reduced quite a bit.
Well, thank you for your time, sir.
No problem.
Now, back to you, Thor, in the studio.
Thank you, Jared, for that interesting news report. And for all of you looking to buy the Pollen X Quattro vaccine, don't worry because insurance pays for almost all of the cost. In most cases, at least 85% of the cost is paid for, depending on prior health issues. Now let's go to our environmental correspondent to talk about the history of pollen. Dr. John.
Thank you, Mr. Peterson. Pollen has existed for a very long time, going back to the Cretaceous period. In my opinion, this is one of the biggest outbreaks in Earth's long history. I have talked to many of my colleagues, including Dr. Pollen, who agrees with my opinion on the outbreak. Now let's go to Dr. Pollen, who will explain the symptoms of pollen allergies and a few other topics.
John, pollen allergies have many symptoms, including itchy eyes, a runny and stuffed nose, constant sneezing, and a cough. There are a few ways to keep pollen out of your home, including keeping your windows closed, drying clothing inside rather than outside, and by keeping pets inside because they can bring traces of pollen in their fur. Although pollen usually isn't a direct cause of death, asthma, which is the disease related to pollen, causes estimated deaths of 9 people per day in the United States. If you have to be outside, there are ways to minimize your exposure as well. Wear sunglasses when you go outside to prevent pollen from getting in your eyes, as well as wearing a mask when mowing the lawn. That's it for me. Back to Thor in the studio.
Thanks, Paul, for that useful information on how to manage your symptoms during the recent pollen outbreak. Although pollen doesn't bioaccumulate in the food chain, some plants give out poisonous and toxic pollen, including the Caesalpinia pyramidalis plant. Try to avoid that plant as much as possible. All of us here at Channel 5 News and reporters around the city are urging all of you to stay inside to prevent harm to yourself and others around you. Hopefully the things we have told you here will help you to minimize your exposure to pollen and help you get through allergy season without much harm. This concludes our public service announcement. Now back to our original scheduled program.
Why do you want an endless summer, Mr. Krabs?
So I can open me latest money-making venture, the Krusty Pool!